Liam Gray is the founder of the Wilberforce Institute, a public policy think tank advocating for the rights of farmers and animals. During this interview, we talk about food policy and the shifting future of what we eat. From the struggles of small farmers to the strange promise of lab-grown meat, we explore how big ag fails and how consumers and communities can reclaim choice, health, and dignity, like gardeners reclaiming soil. May we learn to cultivate both dignity and freedom in our diets, in our farms, and in the future we're planting together. I'm Sienna Mae Heath, and this is Food is Freedom. Well, Liam, I'm glad that we could continue our conversation from Real Unity, where we were discussing liberty as it relates to animal activism. And on Food is Freedom now, I'd like to continue talking about big agriculture and even your own diet and lifestyle and how they've changed and what sparked those changes. Another thing too, we should get into is lab-grown meat because I am a skeptic, but you have some experience that I think a lot of people would, at the very least, be interested to hear about. So thanks again for continuing our conversation today. I'm really enjoying it.
Absolutely. I'm enjoying it as well. I appreciate you taking all this time.
Yeah, of course. So in your work at Wilberforce Institute, you often look at free markets, the corporate state, and big agriculture. Essentially, like just plainly put, what is not working in big agriculture?
Yeah. So I think first and foremost, from our perspectives, is the treatment of animals. I think there's not a good moral justification for millions of animals living their entire lives, thinking, feeling animals forced to live their entire lives in iron cages and with inability to turn around and having to stand in their own waste and all these reprehensible, horrible things that I think it's easy for us to look away from. That I don't think as people it's consistent for us to do so. But I also think that there's a lot on the health side. There's a lot on the on what our food should be and should look like. I One of the things I like to point out is some of these companies. I mean, we were talking in our other interview about the experiments that are going on in Chinese labs. I don't know that it's the if I don't personally trust something food wise coming from the CCP and ultimately Smithfield, one of the major producers, is a Chinese owned company. Do we trust what they're putting into these animals? And for that matter, do we trust any of these companies with whatever they're pumping when the focus is entirely on just pushing out more? I think more and more people, again, crossing any kind of political lines are interested in what is in their food that they're eating. As I know you talk about a whole lot. And you'd also mentioned not feeling it does something to your system when you're eating food that's like lesser quality, some of this mass produced meat. I don't think that's a unusual thing. I think there's we don't know what kinds of antibiotics and vaccines and hormones and whatever else is being pumped into it. Is this stuff that we should be eating in the first place?
Yeah, let's go back to the vaccine topic. I still 5 years later cannot resist. Um,
Me either.
uh, I've heard that there's science in progress exploring how to put mRNA technology or vaccines or whatever you call it into lettuce. Since we're talking about big ag, and you mentioned meat. Do you know much about like what's happening in the background
I'm
in that
having the
area?
hardest time getting any information on RNA or mRNA vaccines in our food, in whether it's in meat and I hadn't heard about the lettuce,
Mhm.
but I don't know if it's my me doing poor research or if it's intentionally obfuscated. But that's something that to me is definitely another one of those very alarming concerns. I mean, uh, when we're talking about, so if we're going to get into the vaccine stuff at all, like um, if we're talking about these experimental drugs and things that previously being told we had to put into our system, you know, that being put into our food supply without anyone really knowing what's going on with it is a very scary, frightening thing that I don't personally feel comfortable with at all.
Calling back to the start of our other episode, um, we were discussing the concept of moral intuitionism, and a point of principle, I think, is consent. Regardless of your views on how to grow food, whether you're a gardener or not, whether you're in this space, if anybody, I feel like regardless, you're pro-vax, anti-vax, anywhere in the middle, I feel like the principle of consent should be something we agree on. Like if I don't
Mhm.
consent to have mRNA injected into my greens or my meat, um, I would, I would like to not have that or be
Yeah.
aware of, like it'd be strange to see that labeled in a grocery store, right?
Hmm. Yeah. Well, and I would imagine they would push back against it because I think it wouldn't do great things for their sales. But that in and of itself is, sort of the point, I guess, is if people knew they were eating this, would they continue to? And
Right.
to your point, like I think consent is a very basic principle that, we should all be able to agree on.
And turning back towards farmers who are caring for their plants and animals in diverse ways, um, I feel like we're really seeing a movement of buying local, but also growing local, growing your own. And you can even, I guess this is sort of an ad for plants themselves, not for me, but like I'm just gesturing to my window here because you can actually grow greens in your window. A lot of people will say, I can't garden because I only have an apartment, but you can grow arugula and spinach free of vaccines from
Yeah.
seed in your windowsill. I know during the pandemic, because a lot of us were cooped up inside, admittedly, I actually quarantined for that first season, and many people, honestly, they think they were kind of bored, they were kind of restless, and meanwhile, the the shelves in our grocery stores were getting sparse at times. So I had a whole flood of people ask me for gardening advice and even want to like buy seedlings because the nurseries were closed here in Pennsylvania. That was actually by law or like official regulation that the garden nurseries got closed for the first couple months of
Hmm.
quarantine. And that was absolutely horrible for any gardener because it was springtime. That's like exactly when all the old ladies and the young ladies and men, are eagerly waiting for the garden centers to open. So what I'm getting at there is I think in recent years we've seen this surge of growing local and buying local. And in your work, looking at solutions for how to regulate our food systems and just be more kind and caring in that regard, what are you seeing farmers do that's working better than industrial practices?
Um, well, I'm very interested in those kinds of different strategies in the local strategies. Something that's interesting. So there's been a push now so California passed a law called Prop 12 a few years ago, which basically just allows for it's basically requires any of the food that's going into California, any of the meat that's going to California to meet sort of like basic requirements, particularly for pigs and confinement and just things like they should be able to stand up and turn around. And since then, there's been a big push from the big industrial ag producers to um, basically dictate to the individual states what law to overturn that law and to dictate to other states what laws that they can implement as far as animal welfare goes. And Massachusetts has a similar law too, which is relevant for this because to get to your question. So that's been real quick. That's been there's another legislative effort right now. I think this is the I don't know millionth time they've tried it. They're calling it now the Save Our Bacon Act, but before it's been called it was called the Eats Act. They tried to actually Biden and I think Tyson or one of the other big producers managed to take it to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court said, no, you get to allow for a lot. The federal government can do a lot of things. It can't decide what kind of bacon California can sell. But I bring it up because there's interestingly a lot of small farmers have actually taken those laws and made taken innovative approaches in order to it kind of jumped into the market of like, all right, now California and Massachusetts need these kinds of need these regulations, so we're going to build an operation entirely around that, and have had a lot of success with it. So it's interesting when the federal government's trying to push back on that. It would actually, whereas where factory farms can kind of go back and forth with meeting these requirements, these smaller farmers can't. So if they go and they undo this requirement, those guys who have done this, who've taken an innovative approach, are going to be the ones that are most hurt by it.
Hmm. And some points of principle that we discussed earlier were mercy and compassion, which go hand in hand. So uh, those of you such as yourself that are vegan, you might not be as keen to, or you're obviously not keen to like to eat meat, right? But I know you've tried lab-grown meat. And as you know, I'm a skeptic of that. It just doesn't seem natural. But your experience of trying it as a vegan too, like were you vegan back then?
Yeah, so it was this year actually, so it wasn't too long ago. Um, but it's yeah, I was able to try a few things. I tried some cultivated seafood and some cultivated chicken, and I grew up eating meat, so I still remember what it tastes like and all of that, and it was pretty close. It was a little some of the stuff had some textural differences, but it tasted good. It was what I had was great. I've actually there's also some things out there which I don't know as much about, but there's certain things like there's a company called Every, which is making a protein where they can put it in like cold brew and things like that. It has no there's no taste to it. It's just like a liquid protein, and that's an interesting concept to me that I love to learn more about. But I understand the skepticism with it, and I have had my own share of that. I think the interesting thing with the I if I we use lab grown and cultivated interchangeably. So if I say cultivated, I just mean lab grown. It's the same thing. But I think learning about the process some, and I don't really understand the science fully. It's not how my brain works mostly. But there's some precision fermentation stuff that I think is really interesting. My biggest thing with it is you have a lot of people who are genuinely trying to come up with a market solution to give people the opportunity to still eat meat, but also do so in an ethical framework, right? And I think that is a good endeavor, if nothing else. My issue comes when the research of that, because there's still more research to do before I think it's ready, before we could have lab grown meat on the shelves. I think you still need there's some energy costs and things like that need to be figured out to make it marketable, or to make it financially solvent. But we've had, I think, states now already ban it before it's ready to even just ban even researching on it. And that to me is kind of crazy. It's that sort of preemptive shutting down of the option of trying something different, and of coming up with a new way of getting our meat out there.
Yeah, I was gonna call it premature pruning. It's just like it doesn't
Ooh,
seem quite
yeah.
time yet. And consumer choice, of course,
Mm-hmm.
is a value that many of us share in our free markets, regardless of whether you're going to try lab-grown meat or not. What are you doing at Wilberforce to advocate for that choice?
We just had, I think actually the most recent article on that came from one of our younger writers, is Isaac de Blasio, who's we met him at LibertyCon, Students for Liberty's event. Just graduated, but he's worked with both Students for Liberty and with his campus animal organization. So yeah, it's people like him that see us at tabling these events and get really excited. But he had one in the Hill that was writing that kind of gets at the influences that are guiding these bands and pushing for these bands. Because I think again it goes back to sort of like everything with this is back to the big ag and the big industrial meat producers pushing for these bans. So we're trying to identify those early and get get information out there and push the consumer choice message ahead of those bans coming through.
Mm-hmm. And what's interesting in this space as of late is these alliances between, for example, conservatives and vegans, or vegetarians, and kind of like the crunchy conservative archetype that's sprouting up in our landscape these days. So you've got animal rights activists, likely vegans and vegetarians, who are all about soothing the suffering of animals, right? And the inherent quality and value of life. Meanwhile, we've got quote unquote pro-lifers on the other side of the political spectrum, but on principle, very much in harmony, at least from a bird's eye view. Um, what points of unity are you finding in this space, in this overlap?
So I think that the it's interesting that was earlier I mentioned Mary Eberstadt and her writing on this as being probably where I took the moral intuition phrase from, and that was in an article called Pro Life Pro Animal. Matthew Scully has another very similar article to that too, kind of getting at that concept. I think that there's the idea that regardless of whether kind of in counter to what you hear from someone like Peter Singer. Peter Singer is a philosopher. I'm sure a lot of listeners know about him, but he has written a lot for animals, but very wrote some very callous things on the in favor of abortion. I think there's a basic idea that life matters regardless of whether that life can defend itself or speak for itself. And actually, the less that the more vulnerable and the more unable to stand up for yourself, an individual life is. I think that makes it there's a stronger impetus to see the value and protecting that life. So I think there's a lot of natural intersections between the idea of protecting animals and the idea of standing up for and taking a pro-life position on abortion. That I think in both cases it's just that it's getting to the inherent recognition of the value of life, and it's interesting that there hasn't historically been as much crossover on there, and that's the kind of thing that I think I mentioned earlier an article from Mary Eberstadt where she gets in is kind of the why that hasn't happened and why it should happen, because really the arguments are very similar. They're kind of the same when you're supporting both.
Intersectionality is often associated with the left, and like in academics, intersectionality of whatever it is, race, religion, and so forth, gender identity. But now what we're actually getting into is the intersectionality of pro-life and animal rights and food freedom. And as we're in like what I would call like kind of a spiritual shift of ages, so many of these ideas that we're grappling with, and just the obviousness that the systems that power our hesitate to say secular, but a materialistic society just aren't working. They're not functioning. And so that's why we come back to these principles of mercy, of compassion, of grace. And I think what's really heightened in the psyche of a lot of Americans' minds is um, where do our morals come from? Is it intuition, like the moral intuition that you were describing? Is it only from religion or is it from something else?
Yeah, and it's very interesting because I've wondered sometimes. there's a cognitive dissonance, I guess, where you've seen this used by sort of, yeah, I'm always hesitant to say both sides, but let's go with both sides for right now. The pro-choice vegans and the pro-life, meat eaters, where you'll see it used as a cudgel in arguments, where they're like, oh well, then why, for on the one side it's the, oh then why, how do you justify eating meat, and the other side is then how do you justify abortions. And it's interesting to kind of sit back and be like, well, yeah, I don't in either case, or I'm I'm consistent in both these cases. I think you're right. I think there's a need and again a kind of an undercurrent of trying to get past these divisions that have, there's kind of an idea that you're on one team or the other, and these are the views that you hold if you're on this team, and it's more about kind of getting the one-upsmanship of supporting your team. And I think when we get away from that, we look at these things at a you know in their own rights, with their own merits, with the applying consistent logic, uh the right course kind of reveals itself. Now that can sound, I guess, you and I have both talked about not, I don't necessarily, I don't profess to be right about everything. I don't know that everything I do is the right way, but there's certain things that I think are just kind of, at that gut level, that moral intuition level, inherently right and wrong. And, the more as a society we can kind of put away the arbitrary divisions and kind of just lean into doing the good, right, and true thing, I think that's where we're going to see greater flourishing as humans.
And I'd love to hear more about your wife's journey of becoming vegan. Is that right? She's vegan
She's
too?
not. She's
No,
vegetarian.
vegetarian. Okay. And you said that she became vegetarian in around the time when your dog was
Yeah.
passing.
So it's interesting for her. Her parents are were from Guatemala and El Salvador, and she talks a lot about kind of she's had a cultural difference, different viewpoint on animals kind of growing up. And that's not to say that everybody has those viewpoints or whatever, but in the way she grew up, it was just, dogs were thought of differently, not so much as in the way uh we think of them, and not as it wasn't as it was kind of more of a, dogs belong outside of the house kind of upbringing that she had. And she always loved our dog, but it was in that moment when she saw him, so we when he got hit by the car, we had to carry him to our car, take him to the vet hospital. And she was sitting in the back with him and holding him, and he was, bleeding and obviously, suffering. And I think that just hit her in a way, just kind of, him needing her and leaning on her, and suffering in that way, I think just really brought it home for her. And it was after that, and while I don't remember exactly how immediate it was, but it was after that that she said, you know what, I don't feel comfortable eating animals anymore. And at that point I was already, on that train. I was already doing that, but her movement there, and just also that experience itself for me was kind of this I think sort of set me on the course too for ending up starting Wilberforce. It was kind of uh, a catalyst for realizing I needed to kind of move that direction and do something for animals. That it was something I just quietly done on my own for a while, and I wanted to take a more get more actively involved in helping animals.
Gosh, what a visceral experience. I've never heard of that being an origin story for a company, let alone why someone became vegetarian or vegan. Um, and just going back to the morality of a lot of this, I just saw a bumper sticker about like animal rights and vegetarianism that read something like, um, is it really a choice when the animal doesn't have one? Which is really echoing the pro-life sentiments as well.
Mm-hmm.
And we saw similar sentiments during the pandemic of pro-choice and pro-life and regarding the body as a
Mm-hmm.
temple, essentially. And animals can't really speak for themselves, although we were saying your dog and my cat, who's right here, can definitely, vocalize. But yeah, like it's just fascinating to me in recent years how both sides, so to
Yeah.
speak, are saying the same thing,
Hmm.
but they're screaming
Yeah.
it at each other.
Yeah, exactly. And it's I don't know. I always feel on the cusp of sounding conspiratorial, I guess, when I when I sound like when I talk about this stuff. But it does feel like we're being it's historically like growing up. It was the narrative was always like, oh, you have Republicans who are anti big government and pro big business, right? And then you have the Democrats who are pro big government, anti big business. Now, the extent to which either of those was ever true, debatable in and of itself, right? But now I think more than ever, it's like, well, they're the same thing. Like, what are we even talking about? And so it's interesting. You listen to yeah, people on all sides of all issues, and we're getting at these kinds of things where it's like, you know, is there even a difference between these big executive branch Leviathan departments that are kind of doing that are unelected and unaccountable to the people, uh, who are working in common cause with these big corporate conglomerates. Like what exactly is the difference, and what are we're like you said, we're screaming at each other basically the same thing.
Yeah, the irony is not lost.
Mm-hmm.
And with politics inevitably involved in big agriculture and the big decisions that are being made, I mean, what are you seeing lately that's maybe kind of discomforting? Just like with what's going on lately, honestly, it's like it's really hard to keep track of.
Yeah, well, I think so. The one I was talking about, that Save Our Bacon Act, that used to be called the Eats Act. That one I think is pretty big, because if that goes through, you're effectively, despite the fact that this has failed in Congress multiple times, it's failed in the Supreme Court. They're still pushing it, but that would effectively erode federalism entirely, and you're basically saying, because again, it's making the law of land for how animals are treated in individual states. Like, you're making it so that the states can't make those kinds of determinations, which I think is, it's effectively, when you look at the influence that big ag has, particularly over the federal government. I mean, you're basically saying these guys are going to be in charge. Yeah, they're going to be setting the standards for animals in the country, and I don't think that it's in keeping with any political ideology to say that it should be the case that you know again, Chinese owned Smithfield, Tyson, these companies should be in charge of deciding what the limits are for how they treat animals, right? um, so I think that one's huge, and definitely something that we're pretty focused on. And other than that, it's kind of the same. It's we're I wrote an article, co-authored an article where we use the phrase jurisdictional fiefdoms, to refer to kind of how these individual departments and agencies work, in the executive branch, where they're kind of before we just had the Supreme Court case, losing off the top of my head, but there's been the Reins Act, which Mike Lee and some others have been pushing for years. The idea of that, where it's right now Congress can kind of defer. Right now, Congress will write legislation that basically abdicates the legislative power and pushes it over to the executive branch, and then these executive branches are coming up with their own regulations, and that are effectively just legislation coming from those branches. I think you see a lot of that in what we're talking about with big ag. I think that the USDA, in a lot of ways, is operating as if food is its jurisdictional fiefdom, and it kind of sets the standards and tones based on the special interests that prop it up and keep it going. So that's a lot of the things that we're talking about, whether it's the barred owls and spotted owls, or if it's, animal experimentation, a lot of these things kind of go back to that idea and to that, to that branch in particular, but kind of a lot of the executive branches in general, or executive branch departments in general.
Yeah, like just for anyone that didn't listen to the Real Unity episode, we were talking about how what was it? Barred owls are being killed to save spotted owls. And this concept of sacrifice and just like lacking in mercy and even logic, although I'm not a wildlife expert, we see that in the food freedom space too. I like on a legislative level, are you seeing some like weird paradoxes or like illogical posing of solutions to some of these problems in big ag?
um, I don't know if there's anything stands out to me on like the kind of inherent paradoxes on for bills that are coming out. Um, the going back again to that Eats Act one, a lot of the stuff is just it's sort of not necessarily legislative initiatives that are coming out currently. It's sort of looking at the structure. You mentioned before, kind of, are these structures working for us? The sort of the structure that's in place currently, right? Where we have, I think a lot of what we're hoping to do is shed some light on that and pull back on those areas, and stop the government propping up this one industry and these certain players in the industry.
Mm. And in the area of academics, and I'm curious about this because I think we both agree that much of academia has been ideologically captured.
For sure.
We see what I think are kind of incompatible approaches to like whatever the topic is at hand. It just seems to be like captured by ideologies that don't really seem relevant to the topic at hand. But maybe there's something we're not seeing. I don't know. You mentioned PETA being kind of an incompatible organization with yours. Um, it's really I try not to refer to left and right, but it's hard not to. What are you seeing that's just kind of like certain organizations that just don't jive with yours, and how does yours set itself apart in the realm of big agriculture and all that?
Yeah, I think some of so I talked to a lot of people in the existing animal movement, and I don't mean to like sound like I'm just disparaging that whole movement, because there's so many people that are doing such good work, and just because I don't see things the same way, politically, as them doesn't negate what they're doing. But I did notice it was interesting talking. I had a conversation with one where had they got scared when I was mentioning kind of libertarian thought in a positive way, and they uh, brought it up in terms of, because their thing was, oh, but libertarians want no regulations, and there's going to be chaos without regulations, and so in that, I think that kind of mindset is the big difference, right? Where when I think about that, I'm like, well, look, you have, and this is something I think we mentioned in the other podcast, but right now, vast majority of people, almost everybody, I would argue, everybody who's not being paid by factory farming thinks factory farming is pretty not great, right? No one really, you never see bumper stickers advocating for factory farming, and yeah, it grows every single year. It's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And do we think that's happening because of the absence of regulations? Like, I don't think that's the case. I think there's, I don't have the number of USDA edicts or regulations on hand, but I don't think it's small, right? Um, it's interesting, even when we talk about, we talked about animal experiments earlier, and the Agriculture Research Service is one that I brought up, where it's they're doing the research for them, we're paying for that. I mean, this was in, I think, 2015, I want to say, there was a big New York Times expose on just the most horrific experiments you ever heard of, coming out of one of their facilities, the ARS's facilities, and this included things like there was some kind of test for survivability for lambs, where they just basically were taking baby lambs and leaving them out in the out in the elements to, exposed to predators and whatever weather conditions, just to see how long they survived, right? um Not long, right, is the answer. But there, and like just these really heinous experiments like that we, again, we're paying for as a government agency. And this that facility is still up and running. As the last I've heard, I mean, the experiments are still just as bad as they were. There is like some level of like congressional oversight, but that's kind of, vanished, hard to track now, and I don't really know. So um, when it's interesting because we're there. There's I think a lot of the organizations, it's they think of the government as the answer. It's always about adding more regulations. But what's differentiating with Wilberforce is we see, all these areas where the government is actually the main culprits in the animal suffering. And a lot of the regulations that are I don't want to say being passed, because in most cases these are just coming from, again, just executive branches. um, they're not actually helping animals, they're hurting animals, and therefore, they're kind of at the behest of, special interests, usually factory farms.
That
And so I
lamb
just think that that's a
experiment. Mm-hmm.
different way of looking at a different perspective that I don't think is, that I think is what is primarily the difference for us.
That lamb experiment really got me. I mean
Sorry,
that's no, it's fine. I mean that is an example of an illogical attempted solution, and one that's ugh, I just so inhumane. Like I can't imagine
Mhm.
that even being like conceived in conversation. Like I know, let's
Yeah,
leave the lambs out to the elements and see what happens.
yeah. Sometimes I wonder with those, I think we've all been part of some organizations that operate like this, but and definitely, if anyone who ever has worked in government, and I have this experience from the Army, I think that there's this thing where, yeah, that idea of you get to the end of the fiscal quarter and you want to keep getting the same budget that you have. So you spend as much money as you can so that you make sure that they go, oh, they still need that amount of money. I think that sometimes these experiments are coming from that, I guess, where they have these ridiculous experiments that don't seem to actually solve for anything that we need to be solved for, or that we need solved, and they're heinous and ridiculous. I think, I'm guessing, I mean, this is just my speculation, but I think a lot of it probably comes from that kind of concept. It's like we need the funding, so we're going to come up with this experiment, and somehow, to your point, somehow that leads to this idea of like we're going to go put a baby lamb in the outside and leave him be, which is crazy. So
Yeah, it's truly absurd. Okay, so some people will say that's the fault of capitalism. Everything runs on money, and money is the root of all evil. But you'd probably say something different, right?
yeah, I don't think so. And I think, these I think, when you look at the factory farming and how that came about, like I try to be generous with these companies. I think people were trying to feed as many people as they could, and as quickly as possible. I think you just got to I think, in part, I think, it's just gotten to a scale that's just unfathomable, and and that is part of the problem. But I think that, you know there's no way of looking at that sector and saying that that is a free market approach, and that this sector became what it is because of the free market. um Ultimately, it is completely propped up with subsidies, with law, with regulations that are favorable to it. With, again, its marketing and its research are paid for by us. Where we're pouring millions and millions of dollars into growing this corporate industry. Like the American taxpayer is doing that. Um, I don't think there's anything free market about that. I think it's actually, very much the opposite.
Hmm. Well, and you mentioned the drive to feed as many people as possible. With the increased population, increased homelessness, and hunger, it makes sense that out of desperation, even companies like Monsanto would be trying to invent ways for seeds to go a long way. And I don't know if you're familiar with Vandana Shiva's work in promoting seed sovereignty. But that's caught my eye in recent years too. And I see it even in like my own little microcosm of gardening where I'm trying to be more particular about the seeds that I sow, the seeds that I invest in, the companies I support. And really that's down to like the tiniest of microcosms in the realm of agriculture is where our seeds come from. And likewise where our meat comes from.
Mhm.
I find that meat from the grocery store, however well it's cooked and seasoned, and it fills me up so quickly and like not in a way that feels nourishing sometimes.
Mhm.
Whereas farm grown meat like that just it just feels so much better, and I can't explain it. Also, I haven't tried lab grown meat, so I can't rationalize your experience of it as a vegan. But there are a lot of solutions or a lot of ideas being innovated to try to solve these big existential problems. But in the meantime, we live in that materialistic society, some would say capitalistic, whatever you want to call it, where we're attempting to solve material problems, or we're attempting to solve spiritual problems with material solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there's, it's interesting because on the one hand, I say that the idea was try to feed as many people as quickly as possible, but then you look at where that's gotten to now, and we were just talking about, the uh, lab grown meat and kind of that as a potential alternative, but the same interests that we were talking about before are the ones that are pushing for that to get banned and to stop it out of the gate. So kind of denying the innovation. So it is true that there is like a motivational quandary there, and like and what to do about that. Is an answer I don't have, right. It's like except that the it's a company is naturally going to support its own interests and try to grow and get bigger, and that's what a company should do. But for our government to act on its bidding is, again, contrary to that idea. It's not, we shouldn't be paying with our tax dollars for trying to do that, to further that endeavor.
Yeah, I always say so many of our problems would be solved if we could earmark our taxes.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that would be, yeah. Um, yeah, being able to decide you're paying for and what you're not going to pay for seems like it actually kind of goes along with what you were saying before about consent.
Yeah. And another small way that we can make a difference is with our diets and our food choices. You're vegan, right? Why and how did you become vegan? What prompted that? I know your wife's origin story was related to your dog's passing, but was there a moment where something just shifted for you and you made that change?
So it's funny. I joke a lot that I actually first wanted to become a vegetarian when I was like 5 years old, and I told my parents that, and they said no. And it was just kind of how it was. um,
Mhm.
and it's funny kind of talking to some of the sort of lifelong vegans that I've met in this in this world, because that's a very foreign concept to them. But I think I think it would be relatable to a lot of other people. But so I guess that I think goes to that sort of that moral intuition thing, right? Like, and we've seen this with a lot of kids. You have this where they find out why chicken's called chicken, and they go, I don't want to eat that. Um, and so I think I always kind of had that in the back of my mind, and it was um, I had a weird journey with it, but for me it was just that I would have those conversations whenever they came up, and I'm someone who kind of can't deal with having when I recognize that I have like contradictory and inconsistent beliefs, it bugs me to a point where I'm like, how do I reconcile this, and how do I fix it? And that was the one. It's just it was one of those where I never could really. I don't have like as good of a story as my wife on it, but for me, it was just kind of this gradual thing of like, man, I can't really justify this. It doesn't. I don't see where I have the right, and I don't want to continue to support with my dollars, put money into the animals being treated this way. Um, And the kind of the jump from vegetarian to vegan was more of just it's sort of kind of more of the same. Um, that was actually the harder jump for me. But I think that while I obviously I believe wholeheartedly that people, would like for everyone to make that choice, right? I don't, um, I don't think the way to to end, to stop people from eating meat is to just continue to push, vegan on everybody. And I think that's it is a big ask. I think that's a thing that people can kind of forget, is that, um, when, it's not, we're not just asking, if you're talking about going vegan, you're talking about really changing, a number of facets in your life, like on the daily level. It's not just, some of these other social movements and things that have had success. You're saying, it'll be more, if you just say, okay, well, now I believe this, then that's the only ask of that, right? Whether it's, whatever the political issue is, all you have to do is just affirm that you you think something different. But this is actually really, it's like, if you get there, there's you're changing how you eat, and your a lot of your social engagements and things on a day-to-day basis. And it's a big, a big thing. So I'm very understanding with people who don't, see eye to eye with me on that, and don't, and haven't, gone that direction, if that makes sense. But I do think it's just something that is, when you look at factory farming, and you look at how these animals are treated, and you look at all the kind of the, um, extended consequences of that, from, again, from how we handle, wild animals, and how we, um, the experiments on animals, the horrific experiments on animals, that to kind of sustain that, and all these kinds of things that come from it. It just seems like an evil that I don't think that we, it makes, is becoming of, us as a people, and as a nation.
Yeah, you mentioned veganism changing your social life, essentially.
Yeah, there's parts of that, right, where, I mean, it's an awkward thing to go to have to always look for the vegan options and and depending on where you are in the country, if you're going out to eat with people, it's, some restaurants are significantly better than others in that regard. I think this is a weird reference, but there's a John Mulaney, bit where the comedian, where he's talking about, as someone who didn't drink alcohol, no one knew what to give him at a party, and they go, "Oh, I have a old turnip in the back of my fridge. Is that something that'd be good for you?" And there's sort of something like that, where, like, I think sometimes you see some of these menus, and it's like, oh, good, I can have a piece of lettuce for dinner, or whatever the case may be. So it's yeah, but that's all I
Mm.
really mean with it, is it's a, it is definitely a big change for people, to ask of people. We've
Unless
kind of
the mm, unless
we
the
just kind of
lettuce
built a
has
culture
a
around it.
yeah, sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just thinking like unless the lettuce has mRNA and then you might have to
Right,
leave.
right.
But yeah, yeah, I have a friend who's gluten free and she tends to bring her own food or if we're going out, she chooses the restaurant and I just hope for the best.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's that exact kind of thing. So
Mm.
it's just the difference, there's a big moral implication riding on it as well.
Maybe something that sets Wilberforce apart is that you're not pushing a narrative, for example, of go vegan. Like I see some other organizations where they're saying like this is what you should do, and they're not in a way pro-choice. They're saying this is what's right. If you're not with us, you're against us.
Yeah, I think that's been a pretty, essential thing for us from the start. We have, intellectual diversity, right, in the mission statement, and that's for, because I think it's a very important part of what we're doing, and that is, the organization itself. Not everybody in the organization is vegan. Not everybody's vegetarian, in Wilberforce. We have kind of different perspectives on that. There's some different political, views too. We have, some people who are very, very libertarian, some are very conservative, and, our kind of our unifying thing is we all believe in protecting animals. We all believe in, uh, the free market, and we all believe in advancing liberty. And so with those three unifying elements, kind of however that how that manifests for you or what that looks like on the individual level can vary.
Yeah. And on the individual level, like how would you recommend that people balance affordable food, getting affordable food with advocating for humane treatment of animals?
That's a well, it's interesting. I think there is an argument that eating vegan can be a lot cheaper. Um,
Mm.
but that's a it's I think that's a tough question with food in general. I mean, even beyond the meat question, right? Where this is sort of kind of taps into the whole you mentioned the kind of crunchy conservatives and the you could say the Maha movement and all these kinds of things where um there is that question of like healthier foods cost more, and that's why we have so many of these that's where the market is for these cheaper foods. But I also think it's ultimately, I mean, we have to figure out ways of uh people eating better food in general. Like I think we're so much of what's on our shelves is barely qualifying, and that's a frightening prospect. Is that something, if I can ask you, is that something that, 'cause I know you've looked a lot at the farming, like you talked about grass-fed meat, which is obviously
Mhm.
more expensive than the store-bought. How can I ask you how you would answer that question? How you have dealt with that?
Yeah, well, actually, it's just that my body has changed with regards to the meat that I choose because the meat that's I guess cheaper from the grocery store, unless my mom cooks it and with all of her special spices and ways, it just doesn't taste as good to me,
Mhm.
and it fills me up. It just fills me up in a way that's like is not nourishing.
Yeah,
Whereas grass-fed meat that I'll buy from my local farmer or just even just like organic from the grocery store, it lasts longer for me. Like I can have like half a portion and I'm good. I'm good for the day even. Like I really don't eat a lot of meat, but I get protein from other sources and just enjoy enjoy as much as I can from my farmers, honestly. And some of the food at my farmer's market, honestly, it costs less, especially the produce. It costs less than what I would spend at a grocery store.
yeah, and that's kind of a bit of what I was getting before too. Is like locally grown produce. I mean, usually, our dollar goes a lot farther with that than it does, would on virtually anything else. So
That it does. Well, I really admire what you're doing, Liam, and I'd love for anyone who's listening to support you, to support Wilberforce and however they can. What are some specific steps that maybe people can take to support you guys directly or just the causes of animal activism and food freedom?
yeah, well, I would say for our part, we have a if you go to our website, which is just www. Or sorry, it's just Wilberforce.institute. Um, we um, have a sign up there for our newsletter. We're also should be up by now, but adding a volunteer portal that you can sign up for on our website, and we're going to be putting out ways of getting involved for animals in a way that advances freedom to anyone who signs up. We send out our newsletter, which has all of our articles, which we've been publishing those, and uh, all the major outlets, especially libertarian and conservative outlets, but also the Washington Post and Real Clear Politics and all these other, a number of other outlets that are not necessarily ideological bound or bound or ideologically the other way. Um, so I would say go to the website, sign up there. You can also follow us on X, and yeah, reach out. We'd love to talk to anybody who's interested.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Liam, for making space for a conversation, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you as well. I really appreciate you having me on.